It's time for another Fix My List. So, if you don't know how this goes, I pick 3 lists generally. I end up talking to the individuals, usually on a voice call. We go over what units they want to keep on their list, what the archetype they want to be and identify with. I talk through options, variations. I get context for the terrain, how competitive the player is, get a good gist for the individual, and let it be known that I don't adjust just for no reason, and I don't just throw in what I like to use, though that does obviously sometimes push you in a direction of what I like to, I suggest, but that doesn't mean we get stuck there. So we have 3 lists with 3 different detachments, 3 different style of players that are all coming from different, backgrounds or buildups when we get into this fixed list. So it's really cool. Thank you to that. And if you don't watch the whole video, at least listen to the end for the announcement that we're going to do, because it's going to be relevant to what we do going forward and this kind of video. So one thing else we got to talk about is Orktober. So we have the character bracket tier list. If you don't know who the gets are, get familiar with your own lore. Don't come at me. Whoa! But all of these guys will have relevance, whether it's a game or lore, in a book. And so these are who would you like to see in the 11th edition. Let GW, let the whole Warhammer community know which gets we want to see, right? So with that, we have about 500 or more votes so far. So great job, everybody. Keep that up, and let's get stuck in. So starting off with worst in league. Yes, that's the Git's name in Discord. So shout out to this Git. So he was actually coming from the point of view where he was playing somewhat casually, and he wants to start attending RTTs. Doesn't see himself going out and going undefeated and winning, but he does want to at least like end up 2-1, have relevant games. And then we did talk about his style. He did want to stick to Warhorde. The units that he was really, really in love with, what he wanted to keep was Gaz, with the Pain Boy unit as a big mob for 20 boys. He wanted to keep Beast Bosses, and then everything else, and he liked Commandos. Everything else he was quite flexible with, whether he was going to bring it or not. We did go back and forth about the Squig Hog Boys, because I do think, if you're practiced enough and your meta enough, you can get away with running a brick of Squig Hog Boys. I don't think that things got to get that out of hand for you not to bring them, but I do think it will make it harder if you're not familiar, don't play too much, aren't super competitive. So we ended up talking about those, but let's go through his list real quick, what I like, what I didn't really like, and then we'll quickly move on to what was the adjustments we suggested. So we have Beast Boss with Ed Wappas. We have a Beast Boss and a Squiggle Sword, brutal but cunning. Big Mac with Shock Attack Gun, Boss Snickrock, Gazgul, and the Pain Boy with Follow Me Lads. Only 1 truck, which was pretty decent, light on transports. 10 Snagga Boys, a 20-man boy unit, and a 10-man boy unit. 2 Gretchens, 1 Kill Rig, a Commando, a big brick of Squig Hog Boys, and then the Storm Boys with the unit of Tank Busters. So first off, if we're just going to leave the list how it was, if I was just someone's friend, quick suggestion you can make is swap the Beast Boss and Squigosaur and Edwapas, typically, as you would want him to actually get the Dev Wounds if you were to fight. I don't hate that enhancement combo. It is a good amount of points, though, you are investing. And typically, with the Warhorde style list, you want more stuff that can get fight, end up in trades, really push and swing the game on that one wall, go turn. So with that being said, I also did kind of not necessarily love the place of the Shock Attack Gun with the Tank Busters. Now, some will argue there is a place for a Tank Buster unit or 2 on your list. I'm not someone who technically loves that, but there are lists where if you just go full MSU heavy, you can run through with that. It actually has some merit, but he's not going through an MSU heavy list. He wants, Gaz. He kind of wanted like a Kill Rig or a Squig Hog Boys. These are big elite bricks. That means if you start bringing Tank Busters, that's a big expensive package that's going to sit back and not really push to momentum. What I like to call fail forward sometimes as an Orc player, where your wall turn doesn't go necessarily your way on killing everything that you like to kill. Maybe you feel a charge here and there, but typically you have your models on objectives and you're failing forward, as in you're pushing the primary, taking board control, you're moving up the field. Tank Busters don't fail forward in Warhorde, right? They're not getting bust from the detachment, and now you have a unit that's sitting back and trying to put Daka downfield instead of moving forward onto objectives, touching units, getting in the way, move blocking, performing heroics. So I ended up not necessarily loving that because we're not an MSU style, right? So with that being said, we moved on to the style that we did end up adjusting to. Kind of got some meat and potato-y with it, as I like to say, because these are a lot of redundant reliable tools and units that we're using. And of course, this is live, so shout out to live chat. Whoa, to the gets that are here on an early live stream. So, and we got our boys in chat. So we have 2 beast bosses this time because there was some contention there. If you are watching this and you kind of like the list, there is an argument that you can bring 5 knobs and a war boss for a similar point cost. He was just in favor of bringing more snaggas. It's more OC volume of punches, and obviously they just do great on Warhorde style, with the sustains for the beast bosses. But he did end up bringing 2 of those, though. Like I said, you can argue you can bring knobs. Now, we have a Big Mech with Follow Me Lads. He ended up really wanting to take the Big Mech for that case when we really talked it out. I do think the Pain Boy totally has merit, but there's something about kind of establishing your will, right? Making the enemy react to you, even though, of course, a high-end player could, proactively screen you and understand where you're going to end up, but that takes more time off a player's clock. They have to think about more contingencies. The game can end up unraveling for an intermediate or even a high-level player if they're not like world-class, just by having the Big Mech with that really unique ability. So he wants to try, he wants to have fun with it. I'm down with it. We have a boss Snickrot, just because where his point cost is at and it's uppy downy. It means he can do sabotages, he can screen your backfield, and then he can always kind of threaten your enemy's home, right? Why is that important? Because when you're Warhorde, everything wants to go forward, which means the enemy can retort with sticking their home and coming towards you. If you can let them know you can't do that to me on certain missions, well, that's a big deal. Then we have, and of course, just his lone op on against shooting matchups. So then we have Gaz, because he wanted to keep that alongside a Pain Boy, and then not alongside a Big Boy. That's with the Big Mech. But then we move on to the second mob, because what I always like to mention to people is when you are talking about competitive systems, you do want redundancy. If it's just one mob, which I do sometimes like building lists like that, it's not as effective as if you have 2 for continuously holding that board and continuing that style of play, which is an attrition / board control / break your spine, right? It's all of those in one, which is why it's so powerful and why so many people are moving to this style. But we have a Pain Boy and a War Boss, yet we still got to fit Cunning but Brutal. Now, at first, he wasn't sure if he wanted that. Maybe drop something, fit more points. But I'm someone who actually kind of likes Cunning but Brutal, especially in this redundant style where you have 2 mobs now. And a lot of the time, people are going to, pretty much every time, they're going to prioritize his Gaz unit with the Big Mech. And they might try to delay the Big Mech unit, the War Boss with the Pain Boy unit, and they might maybe stick some charge rhinos into it, some other chaffy units, hope something survives the contact, staying away from your characters. And then if you can't fall back, well, then oops. In this case, because you have Cunning but Brutal, it means when they, and some lists just simply don't have the volume to chew through the Gaz unit, and the Pain Boy unit. The Pain Boy just exists. Well, now you can fall back, reestablish a charge, so you get to fight first and get the initiative on maybe in a primary in the middle, or make it to an enemy's home objective. That happens so often with Cunning but Brutal. So we do have the 220 boys and the 210-man snaggas. So a lot of OC, a lot of boys. Not necessarily a stat check Hordy, but it's a good amount of bodies that will kind of meet that first criteria of, do you got enough dice? Can you rely on this? But we keep going with that style. So we have 3 trucks, for the beast bosses. But then we also do have a battle wagon for the Pain Boy unit. Okay, so you're playing GW, not a lot of staging for multiple wagons all the time. You can stage one up, then your gas brick stays up in the middle, and your trucks move out to play, natural expansions for the enemies, get in skirmishes, get in those early fights. But speaking of early fights, we have 10 flash kits. So the 10 flash kits was something we kind of talked about again, back and forth. You could argue for more 5s. Like I mentioned, you go for SWAT teams. But this was another thing where sometimes the enemy just doesn't get into necessarily charge range without calling a wall. But you want to get some DACA on these units downfield. Maybe you want a threatening overwatch. You want some dual utility from actually utilizing the shooting phase. And this goes again to the big, situation going on with this list of, I have a lot of wounds, bodies, ablative wounds, and I'm playing the mid-table heavily with this list. These guys can get into fights. They have the Gaz, the Makari, or near them, so they're shooting with sustained lethal, they're fighting with sustained lethal, and a bucket load of dice. So they just kind of fit the style of this list. 2 Gretchen units, because you can't ever let someone get behind you, and sometimes you might need one as a screen. And then to pull it all together, he really wanted the Mandos, so we fit the Mandos on the list. splits into 2 5-man units. This again allows you to establish this double mob making contact with the enemy and controlling where the enemy can actually screen you, block you, and kind of bait them into altercations they won't want to be in. Overall, just great utility in this. I really like this list a lot. Maybe a little less AP, like I said, with the beast bosses than I would like. You could swap one of those for a knob. But nonetheless, this list had a lot going for it. You could make minor adjustments here and there. It was 1995, but Warts and League's going to take it to an RTT and let us all know how it goes. So, whoa, for that get, as we got stuck in and switched it up, and we move on. So we move on to now we're moving on to someone who is we'll call a veteran player. He's already run this list at least 10 times. He plays regularly. He goes to RTTs regularly. He wants to attend another GT. So he knows what's going on. Love this guy. What's up to the legend? So me and him had a good chatted up for about 30, 40 minutes about everything. And we obviously him being a channel member, but also being an orc player, we agree on some things. But and Bully Boys being so homogenous, there's a lot of things to agree on. But it was good to hear him unpack why he made these choices in the style of list he was going for. That way I can make an informed decision on what I feel like saying. So let's just look at his list, which I actually do like. He has a Big Mech in Mega Armor, but 2 of them. Gazgul Thraka, a War Boss in Mega Armor with the Teleporter, and then Zagrat Wartsnega. 2 trucks, a battle wagon, 2 5-man units of flash kits, a big brick of Gretchen, and then a small unit of Gretchen. He has commandos, 2 5-man units of Mega Knobs. They have the Shootas and the Power Claws, and then a 3-man unit of Mega Knobs with twin kill saws. Actually, I think we switched them to twin kill saws. They might have initially been Shootas. Nonetheless, it was a 3-man unit. He has a 10-man unit of Knobs with Power Claws, and then a Storm Boy unit. The Knobs with Power Claws are for Gazgul. He absolutely loves this nuclear bomb. And like we spoke about when we broke down this detachment as a whole, Bully Boys has always had that issue where it can fail to kill targets on the go turns. And sometimes you really just got to erase those enemy units off the field that are going to ruin your attrition by being too efficient at killing your army and retaking ground from the enemy. So Knobs are that unit. When I re-roll the hits, I can finally get some value and actually throttle damage through the enemy, which is what Bully Boys really has lacked a lot of the times. And then the 1 Storm Boy unit. Really good list overall. So the idea was inspired by Pain Waaagh. If you guys haven't seen the Pain Waaagh archetype, it's where you go for either a high toughness skew or a high volume of model skew, and you lapse that with the 5-up invulns and the double Waaagh and feel no pains. So you take those lot of bodies, whether it's multiple mobs of boys with Pain Boys, and then you're looking for the Waaagh here, or if you're doing Squighog Boys or multiple Mega Knobs in general. So he got kind of inspired by that by taking the Big Mechs and Mega Armor. He said it was helpful for games where they would just keep regenning them, take big commitment out of the enemy, and line up his secondary Waaagh a lot of the time. So I like this list a lot. He did end up having Zod, and when we talk about Zod and Bully Boys, I really, really, really do advise it. And a lot of the higher end players, not just guys from that I learned in the Discord, but guys I know, talk to, yap it up with, do agree and like a Zagrat Wartsneg on their Bully Boys list. It allows you to close the distance in that Waaagh, that first Waaagh, and actually make contact, draw good investment out of the enemies for that point cost. If you're playing WTC, you can probably get away without playing Zod, but generally for GW, how these are nice big open spaces sometimes that you got to get across and you got to make contact, Zod lets you line it up as well. Now, when we were looking at this list, I was thinking, well, how could I really adjust this? Because everything has a purpose. He has the Big Max with Mega Armor. He does like the Ingress unit with the 3 Mega Knobs, and for the point cost, it's flat 200 for how it's built out like that. And so there was a couple things you could consider to swap it with. Would you want Squigs? Would you want War Bosses and Knobs? So the one thing we did talk about was, did you want more OC, more bodies, more volume of punches? For example, a bunch of War Bosses with boys, which I do think is a great way to also use that first Waaagh, either alongside Zod or instead of the one with Zod, because you actually want to go out and kill some enemy units. So sticking some kind of boy missile War Bosses on this unit was taken into consideration. But when all was said and done, and we talked about how he wanted to run this list and his meta, how it was working out, it really was just minor tweaks and war gear tweaks. One thing of those minor tweaks was literally just swapping the flash kits for a boy unit. That was one of the, I know it sounds remedial, guys, but remember, when you're already 10, almost a dozen games in, you know how to run the detachment, and your list is already quite refined into your style. Sometimes it is just a chat, 30 minutes with another fellow war boss to say, hey, what is something I can use? I felt like sticky was going to be good utility to him, whether it's sticking his home or using these units in reserve, sticking the objectives that you can come onto from the side of the field. You could do some sort of leapfrogging where the mega knobs get out of a truck, move on to an objective, the boys hop in, and then the truck repositions. The boys can then jump out eventually and sticky that the following turn. He did end up right away saying that was actually a great switch. Now, there is argument that we would want a little bit more DACA. So losing the second flash gate unit might not be the case for some gits, but when you have Zod, you have Mandos, you can close that distance. The war bosses in mega armor shoot a little bit, and they're walking into the field like that. They're not scared. It ends up kind of making its own space up. So how this list works for anyone who's interested: Mega Knobs draw out the fire with the commandos moving up, in the simple terms. Then he ingresses the Mega Knobs as kind of like a QRF, quick response unit, or he sets them up for heroic interventions to assist. Breaks the enemies back with knobs and gas, typically on that second Waaagh turn. And he says it's been working out greatly. So there wasn't too much critique and criticism to go on here. This was with the Mega Knobs cost changing and the gas change going, I thought everything kind of fit really well to what he was trying to get it done. The only different suggestions, like I said, I would make would be if you would fit boys and war bosses in this kind of unit. But he wasn't willing to drop anything or adjust anything for that. The only thing I considered was the ingress teleporter, war boss, and mega armor, because I do think that the game is a lot more centralized now, and you don't necessarily always need to have a deep strike ingress brick like this. It's not a versatile tool in that sense with the twin kill saws. It doesn't have a volume of punches. So I thought boys with war bosses might be slightly more interesting to go alongside Zod. Nonetheless, I think that he can do very well with this, and we ended up settling on this. So great job to the legend, and I hope you make it through with the RTT. Let us all know how you go, and then following up to the GT if we have to make any more minor tweaks. Great conversation. Thanks, lad. War for the legend. And then we move on to the final list. This list was, again, different context for the type of player this was. This is Jank Tank. He works at a game store. He's familiar with several other games that he plays somewhat casually for the game store purposes. 40K is his favorite. He plays Crusade. He runs a Crusade. This was his Crusade list, but he's actually showing up, jumping directly into a GT. So there's a strong mixture of he just wants to have fun and play what he's familiar with, and a mixture of, but I want it to actually have some teeth on it and at least cohesively go together. So I wasn't trying to take the identity away from this list at all, which is, of course, a Stompa list, Stompa identity at that point. And so I did respect that as we talked about it, but I refined it a bit, right? Because I've taken my Stompa to a fair share, at least to RTT events and competitive games with people and legit lists I've played it into, showed it off on the channel. So I think if you refine your Stompa list, you can get some results. Not that you're gonna win the events, of course, but you can get some wins, some fun wins. And so real quick, let's look at what he had. He had 2 mechs. He had a shock attack gun with Get Finder goggles, Zagrat Wartsnagger, 2 big bricks of Gretchen, followed by 2 small units of Gretchen, 2 mechs bubble chuckers, so mech guns that were both bubble chuckers. It was just 1 unit together. A commando, a Gorkanaut, some Storm Boys, a tank buster brick, and then a Stompa. So this was already having some of the bones, like the archetype, the structure that I've actually used or had before in my own personal list when I took the Stompa to an RTT, the 2 RTTs that I went to with them, and one of them was with cans and one of them with the Gorkanaut Morkanaut, right? It was a fun skew. So I was like, okay, I got this in mind. He didn't want to use killer cans, so that was off the menu. Okay, boohoo. No, just kidding. And the real conversation here, right, is like for any get out there that plays Dread Mob is the Get Finder goggles on with Ludas or with tank busters. What are you thinking here, homie? Right, is what we were talking about. So the first suggestion I made was, what about Ludas? Just interesting how you want to hear them out. There are times where I'm playing this and there's not good overwatches because none of your units can overwatch. So if you have Ludas, you can set up really cool, clean overwatches where say the enemy tries to bait you early or overwhelm you with just crappy bodies, and you don't want to expose anything other than your one Stampa, because he's always kind of exposed. Your Ludus can kind of jump in, shoot the enemy, middle objective generally, and clear what's off there, set up so that the enemy player, when they set up to move their secondary unit to the middle objective, they can overwatch them without utilizing a bunch of buffs and actually kind of circumnavigating an enemy's defensive capabilities. For example, if it was an enemy land raider and it was moving towards the middle objective, they can't pop Arbor, Contempt, and Overwatch. So you can set up cool little traps like that with that unit, and it goes a long way. You can take advantage of long firing lanes that are in GW as well. So I was like, do you feel like doing that? It's a typical piece and kit. But since he had tank busters, right? I like it a bit more than tank busters for this detachment. Since you're really just re-rolling ones, you're not going to be able to fish for like the sustains or anything like that. So he ended up saying, I'm not really sure about either of those units. I don't really know if I like either of them. The tank busters just felt like a lot. Well, I guess I didn't like the tank busters because this was his crusade list. And then he wasn't sure how I felt about the Ludas. So then we spoke it out and I made the suggestions and I said, well, why don't we just go all into the theme since you're trying to have fun and you're trying to win some games? And so we moved on to the suggested list. So now we have his new Dread Mob list. This was with 2 mechs, Zagrot Wartsnega, 1 big brick of Gretchen, and then 3 minimum size units of Gretchen. He did want 2 big bricks of Gretchen and then a minimum. Maybe he wants to screen his backfield like that. That's a fine suggestion, too. But I found myself wanting more stuff already when I was on this list, so I let myself have more Gretchen units. And then, of course, they can jump inside the walkers and silly cases. Then we have 1 unit of flash kits, a Gorkanaut, a Commando, a Morkanaut, the shock attack gun. The shock jump dragsta, and then a Stampa. So funny things tag here and all. One is he really personally just wants to have fun with the walkers being able to take units up the field and they jump out. If you haven't seen that in the after action report I did, the only one I've done so far, but we're going to do more on the channel, you can see how he kind of moved up. I did that with my Gretchen and moved up to take space. That somewhat inspired him, but I also mentioned, sometimes the walkers can't get into spaces and get fights into enemies that are like stuck into corners of buildings, and you might want some kind of infantry unit that can disembark and get into a fight, and Flash Kits ended up seeing the most well-rounded kind of unit that he wanted for that. So ideally the Flash Kits will go inside one of these Morkanauts and Gorkanauts. I did tell him how a Stormboy unit could also jump in, disembark 3, run forward, because the Gorkanaut, Morkanaut, and Stampa are not restrictive to the jump pack boys. So the jump pack boys can get inside of them if you want something else like that. He wanted more jumping, though. He's decided that the Storm boys weren't good enough. He went for Shock Jump Dragsta. A little bit more fun inspiration that we had there, but it was the toughness factor. Everything else here on this list is either a grot or somewhat tough to kill. So he said, well, Shock Jump Dragsta takes more space. Enemies sometimes just runs out of weapons when they're killing all the Titanic guys and they're focused on that. So they don't end up using any of their additional firepower on the shock jump and hope that it kind of dies of small arms. And sometimes it doesn't. It also helps to deny enemy reserves. So sometimes the enemy player you play into might just have a super brick missile that they know it won't make contact with your Stampa if it's combat unit, can't make combat from just walking across the field with it. And they know that if it's a shooting unit, they got to get into range before they can get off on you. So sometimes you just use a Shock Jump Dragsta to jump and deny an enemy reserve unit. So that was his mind in that case. And then Mandos and Zod kind of go together hand in hand. The new ability to split them is fantastic, and it just gives you another asset. So I did just tell him, how this list typically works, kind of like on the extra, better than I did on the after action report. But typically, your Morkanaut is more of your bait. He always has the 5-up invuln. He's kind of always not necessarily turn 1 exposed, but turn 2 exposed. To walk up and start interacting with the mid table, because your Stomp is trying to walk across the field or at least walk to the mid table a lot of time too. Then your Gorkanaut is more of a risk, defensive, hiding behind terrain to come out and interact and bang it out on the wall turn. Gorkanauts specifically really powerful, like in a demons matchup, enemies that don't have great armor saves. So I do find myself the Gorkanauts more killy and the Morkanauts just more drawing out, baiting out enemy abilities and combat and fire. So I think he'll have a good time. He's familiar with the Stampa. When I first met him in person, he was actually running the Stampa too. So he's no stranger to the Stampa himself. Hopefully he pulls out some games and has some epic moments like he did last time. So with that being said, Jank the Tank, whoa, to get stuck in, lad. So now we are at the end of the video for the small fun announcement, right? So fall, the announcement that we're doing is we are going to open Fix My List to general Discord members and Facebook, social media. Hit me up, whatever it is. We'll put it in the channel list when I announce we're going to do the new video. So it's coming up at the end of this month, or next month, sorry. But what we're doing here is we're going to actually have people send their list in, and then we're going to do a Fix My List, while we also have like a call-in show where players and people can call in and get into the conversations and get stuck in between some of the Fix the List. So that's new content we're coming out with to get engaged with the community and actually hear how these chats unroll and envelop, because they do take time personally with each person. So maybe you're a person that doesn't want to talk to me or doesn't want to be on either. Well, you can hear how a conversation goes and kind of think it out for yourself. So it could be very fun. We're going to have some guest orc players sometimes on some of the streams and call-in shows. So it's going to be a great time and a new form of 40K content that has never been seen before. So if that's good and you want to see it, leave some likes. Let me know in the comments. And there's always one thing to keep in mind is don't cross our wall, because we'll knock your teeth out. Whoa.